guys? I'm back here to give you a video on my thoughts on the whole backlash, I guess you can call it, on Brock Lesnar after his performance at UFC 100, which seems to have been the biggest talk of the whole week. I mean, yeah, maybe the topic's been done to death, but really I want to give my thoughts on it. You know, a lot of people are saying, man, Brock Lesnar's antics were terrible. Oh my God, it's the worst thing to happen to the history of the sport. We need to get these pro wrestling elements out of MMA and make it a pure sport. I hate to tell you people this, but first of all, without pro wrestling, there probably wouldn't even be a mixed martial arts. Let's just put it that way in perspective. I mean, you go back to the history of this sport when it was, Valtudo was the name of it back when it was just like a Brazilian street fight type thing. You know, of course there was jiu-jitsu in it, but the biggest fights were they'd have a guy who was a master at the Valtudo versus a guy with a strong amateur wrestling background, and of course the amateur wrestlers at the time to make big money were doing pro wrestling. Hell, look at one of the biggest fights of, you know, the early days of MMA, like at the 20s, it was Kimura versus Helio Gracie. Kimura, big pro wrestler, you know, trained with Karl Gotch. So, right there, that's one aspect of it you got to look at. And then you go over to Japan, where you have, first of all, in the 70s, Antonio Inoki's worked shoots, you know, with the likes of Chuck Weber. And, of course, there's his shoot fight he actually had with Muhammad Ali back in, I believe it was, 74, 75, something like that, where Inoki's doing the whole butt scoot thing. I mean, it was supposed to be a work, but Inoki, being Inoki, decided to make it a freaking true MMA fight, basically. And that's where the word MMA came from. It was the term mixed martial arts comes from a pro wrestler versus a guy with an actual martial art or legitimate sport background, a legitimate combat sport background, I should put it that way, not, you know, some soccer player versus a pro wrestler. But that's just one thing we got to continue to look like. Hell, if you keep going in Japan, look at, you know, Pancrase was started by two former pro wrestlers from, I believe, the UWF, which was a shoot-style pro wrestling promotion as well. It was Akira Maeda and Minoru Suzuki. There was another factor in there, but still, Pancrase was a pro wrestling type deal. Yeah, it was legitimate. You know, there were some fights where they were legitimate, but there were still some fights where the promotion wanted someone to get over, so they'd have, you know, some guy, you know, do a job, based like in pro wrestling. So you continue to go there. The same stuff happened in Pride. You know, a lot of pro wrestlers helped start Pride. Hell, the biggest star from Pride was Kazushi Sakuraba. What was he? A pro wrestler. So let's just cut all this nonsense out that pro wrestling is the devil and it's all about mixed martial arts. Without pro wrestling, there would be no MMA. Still, hell, even look at UFC, okay? Ken Shamrock, what was he before that? Pro wrestler, came over to Pancrase, yeah, did some shoot-style stuff, but still, pro wrestler. Yeah, I mean, he was one of the guys that helped get over because he's a Gaijin talent, and he had a strong look about him, like, oh my God, this guy's a freaking comic book hero. Hell, look at that. Look at the first true program, I guess you could say feud, I will put it that way, in the UFC's history. That is Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock. What helped sell it? They were doing, you know, who's better, and they were doing WWF promos on each other, and they eventually had their fight. Still in the UFC, who, in the early days of the UFC, one of their other big stars, Dan Severn, when he came into the UFC, pro wrestler, and he was the NWA champion. You can even see him, I believe, at UFC 5 when he won the tournament. You can see, you know, Dennis Carluzza and others with the NWA championship belt, you know, trying to get some prestige back in, you know, the NWA, and more so the NWA, we'll put it that way. We're trying to market him as the next Karl Gotch, you know, a true legitimate shooter. And then the sport, like I said, in 2002, it started to get relaunched, you know, after the Fertittas got it and started helping it. The big fight was Tito Ortiz and Ken Shamrock. All because back in like 97, Tito Ortiz was such a big heel. You know, he did that thing after he'd win a fight. You know, he'd dig the hole and put you in it and cover you up in dirt, dig your grave. And then, of course, there's the whole gay Mesger is my bitch flipping off, you know, fucking the Lion's Den camp So, you know, Brock Lesnar flipping him off, let's have all hell break loose. But Tito Ortiz does this in 97, and, you know, Tank Abbott flips off people. Let's, you know, just ignore that. Brock Lesnar, he came from the WWE, so this is horrible. Like I said, that program right there. What sold that fight so much? Was it the fact that, you know, Tito at the time was the UFC light heavyweight champion and he had this, you know, Ken Shamrock legend, and then he's coming back to the UFC? No, it was the fact they were on the best damn sports show, period, cutting pro wrestling promos on each other. You know, back at the time when the UFC had no television deal at all. So this was a huge, huge element for them. So like I said, that aspect right there. Then, you know, look, The Ultimate Fighter happens. What helped sell The Ultimate Fighter, much like a lot of reality television, is, you know, there was drama. But look, the biggest thing on that show, if you remember, it wasn't more so, you know, I'm not going to discredit Stephan Bonnar and Forrest Griffin, because that fight is very crucial to them actually probably sticking around for as long as they have. The UFC I'm talking about on Spike. But what helped sell it was the fact that there was this Josh Koscheck, Chris Lieben feud, you know, with their whole antics at each other, and the fact that these guys had been cutting wrestling promos on each other to help build up their fight. Their fight in, you know, that warehouse type thing with just the guys from the show and a couple commission people from the Nevada State Athletic Commission drew a higher television rating than the Forrest Griffin Stephan Bonnar fight. So put that into consideration here. You know, like I said, right there, and then of course there's more Tito Ortiz, Ken Shamrock stuff, blah. I mean, that's basically where they go. I mean, the UFC, and just even looking at the UFC, they've taken their whole business model and pretty much their company off of the WWE. You know, Dana White is now a figurehead on television because of The Ultimate Fighter, much like Eric Bischoff and Vince McMahon were characters. Look how how they're selling merchandise. They got those toy deals, big WWF thing. Their belts, they're selling belts, big WWF thing. A lot of this stuff is coming from pro wrestling, where they're getting, you know, marketing ideas and how to sell fights. You know, for people to say that Lesnar's promo afterwards was the worst promo in the history of mixed martial arts is an absolute ludicrous statement. I mean, only thing, in my opinion, that he truly did that was bad was, you know, knock their UFC's biggest sponsor in Bud Light, who were absolutely, you know, pissed off about the whole Dana White video blog on Loretta Hunt, which really hurt them. And then, you know, to do it so soon after that incident, really not good. I don't think it's going to drive Bud Light away. You know, Brock apologized and all, but still, that is really not the worst thing ever. I mean, people want to say, oh my God, Brock Lesnar's worse than Mike Tyson. Are you absolutely kidding me? Mike Tyson cut promos basically saying that he wanted to eat people's children, and then he would, like, did he bite anyone's ear off in a fight either? Like, come on. You know, Mike's obviously a guy who's cleaned his life up and all, but at the time, Mike Tyson was clearly, like, one of the most interesting sports people in the world because he was a badass and a heel, basically. So, I just don't understand that. And then, you know, people want to just say that Brock was the low light of the show. I mean, in reality, if you want to pick the low light of the show, you could technically pick Dan Henderson's shot to Michael Bisping after Bisping is completely out cold. I mean, that right there, you know, when the sanctioning committees of, you know, the New York State Athletic Commission, the Massachusetts State Athletic Commission, here in Toronto, or, you know, the UFC is planning on making events up to British Columbia. If they look at that, that could be their big thing of, oh, we don't know. You know, this guy's clearly out cold, and then the fighter continued to attack him. That could be a big issue right there. That, to me, was more of a black eye on the show than Brock Lesnar's promo and coming off after Frank Mir, after the fight. I mean, my whole thing was people were like, man, you got to show respect after that. Look, these two men had been talking a lot of smack and wanted to beat the tar out of each other. I don't know what right it has that you have to shake the man's hand after that. I mean, I understand there's some of that. I mean, if it was a great fight and everyone's laying it out on the line, go for it. But this fight was not that type issue. Frank had said a lot worse things about Brock than Brock ever did say about Frank. Hell, if you just look at the Countdown show, who was cutting the more heel promos on there? It was Frank Mir and Michael Bisping, okay? You know, if you look at that card in general, you know, the three big fights that they were promoting, they had pro wrestling aspects to it. It was, you know, Frank Mir versus Brock Lesnar, you know, whatever standpoint you were, whoever you favored, you chose which other one you wanted to be, the face or the heel. Bisping versus Henderson. Henderson's more so the baby face. Bisping's the heel saying, oh, he's not going to take me down. I'm going to be the first guy to knock Dan Henderson out. Blah, 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 blah. And then you got, you know, GSP versus Alves. Well, GSP's clearly the biggest baby face in this company. I mean, right there, you know, because he's just got this, you know, this look to him, this charisma, how, you know, how well spoken he is. He's the biggest babyface in the UFC, plain and simple. And for people to say that Brock Lesnar is just such a detriment to the sport, are you kidding me? Brock Lesnar has created more interest in the UFC than George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva. Hell, even Chuck Liddell now. I mean, maybe a couple years ago I wouldn't have said Chuck, but hell, even more so than Chuck. Brock Lesnar is the greatest thing to happen to the UFC. Not only for the company as a whole, but hell, for their heavyweight division. Look how much more interesting their heavyweight division has just gotten by one guy, okay? So, that's really all I guess I gotta say. I mean, for those people who want to just bash Brock because, you know, of this double standard, because, oh my god, it came from the WWE, you know, let's just cut that. I mean, these people are just so mad that Brock is, one, an absolute machine. He's an incredible athlete who has only lost one fight, and by the looks of it, had Mazzagatti not stood that first fight up with Mir, he probably would have won. I mean, the man is, that just pisses them off, that a guy from apparent fake pro wrestling has beaten the crap out of, you know, the UFC's hero in Randy Couture. I still have a lot of respect for Randy. He beat Frank Mir now, like absolutely decimated Frank Mir, and he beat up Heath Herring, who was, you know, a gatekeeper, had a lot of fan following. He was, you know, one of the top interesting guys in the company, you know, so that just makes people think the wrong way. So really, that's just one thing you gotta look at it right there. Really, I guess that's it for this video. And I guess people want to just assume that Brock Lesnar's playing a heel. Really, to me, that's Brock. Okay, Brock is someone who likes to be to himself. He doesn't like doing interviews. He's a very competitive guy. I mean, when you look back at Brock Lesnar's career, just look at his history back when he was a wrestler at the University of Minnesota. Like, there could be near-scale riots because this guy would, you know, bring out so much, you know, drama from the fans or whatever you want to put it. So, I mean, Brock's not playing a character. I mean, maybe some of the stuff he says in the countdown shows to sell fights, probably more so because of the fact, you know, it's a fight business. He's trying to sell a fight. He's trying to intrigue you to watch him fight on pay-per-view. So that's just where you got to look at it there. But yeah, let's just continue. Stop knocking the fact that pro wrestling has nothing to do with MMA. I've clearly put all the links together. Just look at the sport as a whole. A lot of the biggest stars are pro wrestlers. And just the fact that all that stuff I've just made about Brock and pro wrestling helping the UFC as a whole to get to where it is right now. I mean, hell, if people were cutting promos like that Brock Lesnar cut it in the WWE now, WWE would probably even be bigger competition to the UFC than the WWE's mentality is with it. But anyways, that's really it for me. I am out. Peace.